political integrity, I want to know where our political integrity as intellectuals is, because that, as lecturers, as people who are paid to think, is our first duty. That now how do I say, I agree with Teresa when she says, I cannot be happy because these people got 40 years. No, of course I cannot be happy. A person died who was basically, trying to carry on this integrity. But I cannot be happy when I see the complacency of us all. We have to get up and start working for this political integrity to come through. And unless there are many of us who raise our voices, and when we speak, people, I don't say they listen, but if we're just a lone voice in the wilderness, or 3 lone, or 4 lone, or 10 lone voices in the wilderness, it's not enough. Our whole departments here have to get up and say enough. Enough, this is not correct. Because, and I think we have a good moment to do this. There is this law, it is about freedom of expression. It is not about freedom of expression, it is about tricking people to curb this freedom of expression. Let us take concrete action, and let us start saying, no, you cannot do this. This is tricking people. And you are tricking people because you are saying what you are saying. There I will begin to believe that the country can move forward, because somebody has to lead it. Let's face it, our 2 political parties are, one, we might as well, is a one-party dictatorship. And the other is so busy licking its ass, frankly, that it has forgotten to be an opposition. So if the opposition doesn't come from us intellectuals, I'd like to know who it's going to come from. And therefore, my plea is, if we want to talk about integrity, and in this case about intellectual integrity, we have to start creating a chorus of voices. And this is, according to me, nothing is going to change unless this chorus of voices really make itself heard. I believe in Republica because I think there was a chorus of voices on the level of civil society. But now it has to be pushed forward by people who can push it forward. So I am waiting for us to do something concrete.
Grazie ħafna, Prof. Scremona. Dr. Lorenz Gonzi.
Grazzi, kantej fil-qosor ħalli ma noħdilkomx wis fil-ħin. L-għonet, irrit nifirħilkom għal din l-inizjattiva. It's about time. It's about time. Pajjiżna għandu bżonn inizjattivi b'saħħithom, b'vuċijiet ġejjin minn kullum kien, speċjalment minn intellettwali. Għaliex l-impressjoni hemm barra, ġustament, mhux ġustament, whatever it is, ma l-impressjoni hija li l-intellettwali ta' pajjiżna għamlu għażla illi joqogħdu bikwietom. U allura din l-inizjattiva tal-lum ħaqqa l-rikonoxximent, l-ewwel punt. Tieni punt. Dal-pajjiż jixraqlu li niddefenduh, jixraqlu. Għaddejna minn momenti diffiċli fl-istorja tagħna u pajjiżna sab il-min jiddefendih. U ħarġu minn momenti diffiċli meta d-demokrazija ta' pajjiżna kienet fil-periklu. U rkuprajnija u mxejna l-qudiem. Erġajna sibna ruħna xi ftit jew f'sitwazzjoni daqshekk perikoluża kif qegħdin illum. Bħalma fl-imoddi sibna min iddefenda l-interessi ta' dal-pajjiż, hemm bżonn li bħalissa wkoll das-sentiment jerġa' joħroġ fil-beraħ. Id-differenza kbira li jien qed inħoss hija meta das-sentiment fis-sebgħinijiet ħareġ fil-beraħ u qisu kollha kemm aħna xi ħadd xelinna n-niċċa, bħalissa mhux qed inħossu da. Hawn sens ta' rassenjazzjoni qawwija, kważi qar minn rassenjazzjoni, qisu aċċettajna li dan huwa l-istandard tal-aġir tal-poplu tagħna u allura kulħadd jimxi ma' dak il-kurrent. Allura rikonoxximent lej Repubblika, lej Occupy Justice, lej il-movimenti kollha li għandna fil-pajjiż li qed jażlu li almenu jiċċaqalqu. Dawn huma fiċ-ċirkostanzi tagħna vuċijiet b'saħħithom iżjed mill-vuċijiet tal-politiċi jew ta' ex-politiċi biex npoġġi lili nnifsi fl-istess. So allura anki llum smaj diskors bħalma nisma' ħafna drabi li qisu tiħta qalb tal-pajjiż, kollox negattiv, spiċċajna armejna lil nfusna, ramewna u qed narmu lil nfusna. Mhux hekk dal-pajjiż qatt għandu ħafna sabiħ, ħafna tajjeb, però sta għal min joħroġ hemm barra u jafas fuq it-tajjeb. L-aħħar żewġ punti fil-qosor. Ir-rabta ta' l-esperjenza Falcone Borsellino u Daphne Caruana Galizia hija straordinarja. Straordinarja. Il-parallelizmu bej iż-żewġ affarijiet tantu maċari. Falcone Borsellino ikkawżaw bidla kbira fil-kultura, storja, atteġġjamenti Taljani. ċaqalqu biżmien, mhux immedjatament, biżmien, imma ċaqalqu s-soċjetà Taljana. Daphne ukoll ċaqalqet is-soċjetà Taljana, is-soċjetà Maltija. Daphne u l-qtil ta' Daphne, l-assassinju. U għeja ma nibżawx nużaw dil-kelma. Aqraw kwalunkwe gazzetta li hemm bħalissa tissa murder. Da mhux murder biss, da assassinju premeditat, intenzjonat u maħsub. U l-fatti qegħdin hemm. Mela, da l-assassinju fetħinna l-opportunità li nirrikonoxxu li dal-pajjiż għandu ħafna problemi. Uħud minnhom uritnihom, uħud minnhom, mela, għandna bżonn waħda minnhom, waħda mill-issues, issemmuha hija l-integrità. Minix sa nidħol fid-dettall għandi ħafna xi ngħid fuq integrità, ma l-verità u nagħlaq b'dan punt. Aħna għandna ħafna istituzzjonijiet sbieħ u ħafna liġijiet sbieħ u għandna l-istrutturi kollha li fit-teoriji qegħdin hemmhekk biex id-demokrazija tagħna tkun b'saħħitha, is-saltna ta' dritt tkun b'saħħitha, kollox għandna perfett. Id-difett, id-diffikultà hija l-għażla tal-persuni li jitqiegħdu f'dik il-pożizzjoni. Xi darba xi ħadd irid ipoġġi bil-qiegħda u niddiskutu bis-serjetà kif kapaċi nagħmlu l-għażliet tal-individwi f'dal-pajjiż. Kif sa jirnexxielna inwarbu il-partiġjaniżmu, l-interess politiku, l-interess kummerċjali, warrab da kollox u għażel il-persuni illi ikunu l-iktar idoni għal dik il-karika. Mbagħad naturalment wieħed irid isegwi l-karriera tagħhom. L-aħħar ħaġa u nagħlaq biha. Sakemm niqpaw maqsumin bejnietna fil-battalji tagħna, nistgħu mmorru dar u nagħlqu ġewwa. Qegħdin maqsumin bejnietna fuq battalja fejn suppost qegħdin kollha fuq l-istess naħa. Meta fil-passat kellna sitwazzjonijiet li kienu jirrikjedu li l-forzi kollha anke kompetittivi ma' xulxin ipoġġu madwar mejda u jitħabtu għal-missjoni, għal-viżjoni, bħal pereżempju sħubija fl-Unjoni Ewropea, il-forzi kollha tal-pajjiż ġew flimkien, possibbli maħniex kapaċi nagħmlu hekk anki issa. Grazzi u keep it up.
Grazzi ħafna. L-aħħar żewġ interventi għaliex il-ħin jibqa' dej, Robert Aquilina u mbagħad Prof. Warrington jala l-attività tal-lum bi ftit riflessjonijiet li tlabtu jagħmel għallum. Robert.
Grazzi George. Fil-ħajja tiegħi ta' notari kolli l-privileġġ li nitkellem man-nies u nisma' dak li għandhom xi jgħidu sikwiet bla barriri. Għaliex naturalment dak li jkun l-affarijiet tagħhom jistrieħ kollu naturalment l-istess bħalma jkollu assis waqt il-qrar. U llu tagħtik l-opportunità inti tifhem sew il-mod kif ħafna nies jirraġunaw. U tifhem dak illi nifhmu il-kol naturalment imma tisma' widnejk li jisom hemm regoli paralleli għal dawk ir-regoli tal-Istat. Jisu hemm ċirkostanzi li fihom dak li jkunu ħossu eżenti mir-regoli tal-integrità. Naħseb antropologu opportunità bħal din tgħinu ħafna biex jifhem aktar fid-dettall is-sitwazzjoni lokali x'inhi. U x'inhuma daw iċ-ċirkostanzi? Daw iċ-ċirkostanzi rigwardjaw l-aċċess għan-netwerk bħalma semmit Therese. Teżisti din l-idea illi inti titqgħod lura milli titkellem u inti intitolat illi titlob pjaċiri għaliex jeżisti netwerk li fil-fatt jeżisti netwerk politiku u ta' nies fin-negozju illi inti jekk inti tikkonforma ma' ċerti normi inti ikollok aċċess għalih. Interessanti li għandna kelma illi ikomuni ma' dik li jużaw l-Italja. L-Italja jgħidu l-arte di arranġarsi. Aħna ngħidu meta mmorru għand politiku, jiena ma mhux naħseb qasintkom, meta dak li jkun imur għand politiku biex jirranġalu, ngħidu jirranġali. U dik interessanti ħafna. Matul dal-aħħar sentejn, aħna bħala Repubblika għamilna kampanja fl-iskejjel jisimha kampanja ta' ċittadinanza attiva u responsabbli. U niftakar biex formulajt il-kampanja anka l-isem, niftakar kont holiday mal-mara tiegħi u tfal, propju sqallija, u kont fassalt il-pjan għal din il-kampanja propju ispirat minn dak li bdejt nara sqallija f'postijiet ta' l-antimafja. F'dan l-anniversarju provajna namlu inizjattiva mal-iskejjel kollha ta' Malta u Għawdex. U provajna namlu naturalment iċċentrata mal dal-5 anniversarju tal-assassjon ta' Defni Karama Galizja. Provajna nikkontattjaw l-iskejjel kollha u fil-fatt hekk għamilna. U ksibna l-kollaborazzjoni attiva tal-iskejjel tal-Knisja kollha, ta' kważi l-iskejjel indipendenti kollha, u provajna wkoll inġibu dik tal-iskejjel tal-Istat. Għas jitwemnu daw l-affarijiet, pero xi ħaġa bħal din dan għal-event ta' sati maximum li nofsu kienet mużika. Kien hemm bżonn li titla fil-kabinett. U deċiżjoni u terġa' tinżel u deċiżjoni kienet illi ma jieħdux sehem fiha billi qasbiss iwieġbu għal-rikjesta tagħna. Li segwa wara huwa xi ħaġa li jien jidhirli li huwa għandu mill-faxxiżmu għaliex li ġara huwa illi naturalment f'ċertu mument trid tissir komunikazzjoni mal-ġenituri biex ngħidulhom li ħassir din l-attività. Il-parteċipazzjoni kienet se tkun mod volontarju, ġifieri il-ġenituri jiddeċidu it-tfal jiġu xi jew le għall-attività, però bdew iseħħu l-attakki u allura rajna illi kellna l-Sajmi Merċieqa, kellna l-Manuel Kuxkiri, kellna l-Kalsona Navarra illi bdew isemmu l-ismijiet, ma jitwemnux dal-affarijiet, però bdew isemmu l-ismijiet tal-kapijiet tal-iskejjel illi aċċettaw illi kollaboraw magħna fuq dan l-event. U din għalija xi ħaġa inkwetanti ħafna li kollok illi l-Kabinett tal-Ministri jiddeċiedi illi l-iskejjel tal-Istat ma jipparteċipawx. Inkwetanti, però illi jaqbżu dik il-linja u jibdew jattakkaw direttament bl-isem u l-kunjom ta' dawk il-kapijiet tal-iskejjel għalija ma tisejjaħ xejn ħlief faxxiżmu. Interessanti fuq ix-xandir nazzjonali. Dan ktibnilhom xhur qabel, injuraw litra, imbagħad ġiet fabbrikata email li suppost inbatet qabel u qatt ma waslet. Insomma biex naħtaħ fil-qosor da fl-aħħar qalu isma' ibatunna xi tkunu għamiltu, u mbagħad aħna nikkonsidraw li nġibukom fl-aħbarijiet. Waqt li l-intenzjoni tagħna ma kien assolutament xejn minn dan, imma l-intenzjoni tagħna kienet illi l-attivitajiet li aħna nagħmlu inkluż dan l-event jiġu mxandra fuq l-istazzjon nazzjonali u inkluż naturalment l-attività li ħanamlu għada fil-għaxija fil-Belt Valletta bħalma sar f'Palermo. Ir-raj aħna tlabna u indikajna fil-korrespondenza tagħna illi nużaw il-mudell tar-raj. Però dan ġie rifjutat u f'ċertu moment għalunna aħna m'għandniex iktar xi ngħidu. L-integrità titlob minna wkoll il-koerenza. U biex inkunu koerenti, jekk aħna nemnu li aħna integri, bil-fors irridu nieħdu azzjoni. U allura jien naħseb li għandna b'xi mod nikkonvinċu lin-nies illi mhux biżżejjed illi tagħmel dak kollu li tista'. Imma rridu ndaħlu l-mentalità li rridu nagħmlu dak kollu li hemm bżonn, għaliex ħafna drabi dak li hemm bżonn mhuwiex sempliċement dak li tista' tagħmel, daw il-kapijiet tal-iskejjel meta mort inkellimhom qaluli minn qabel li ħajkollhom il-problemi u qaluli li kieku jridu jimxu fl-interess propju tal-iskola iktar milli tal-istudenti, daw jgħidu li ma nistgħux nagħmluha. Però għażlu li jieħdu r-riskju. U aħna b'xi mod irridu nikkonvinċu, irridu ndaħlu dil-mentalità biex noħorġu minn din is-sitwazzjoni prekarja li pajjiżna jinsab fih, illi hemm bżonn nagħmlu affarijiet li jidhru ftit straordinari. Irridu nieħdu r-riski u rridu nagħmlu s-sagrifiċċji. L-integrità titlob ukoll li aħna niżiraw it-tama. Għaliex jekk aħna ikonna dill-idea illi maħni se noħorġu minn dis-sitwazzjoni, jew inkella persuni fl-istituzzjonijiet jirrassenjaw ruhom li l-istituzzjoni li jaħdmu fiha mhijiex taħt l-ebda ċirkostanza mhix se tiffunzjona, allura ħajkun hawn sens ta' rassenjazzjoni totali u żgur mhux se jinnexxinna nagħmlu din il-qabża. Allura huwa fil-fema tiegħi obbligu tagħna li niżraw l-isperanza. Irrid ngħid illi jiena bħalma semmit Therese nara ħafna persuni ta' integrità fl-istituzzjonijiet u uħud minn dawn jikkuntattjawna biex jagħtuna spjegazzjoni ta' ċertu ċirkostanzi. Uħud irrid ngħid f'dan l-aħħar żmien kelli l-opportunità li nitkellem ma' diversi persuni anke li jkunu għaddew l-informazzjoni li mbagħad ippubblikajna. U interessanti li dawna ikunu jridu jispjegaw ruhom. Ikunu jridu jispjegaw li huma mhumiex tradituri, huma mhux qed jgħaddu l-informazzjoni għax iridu jagħmlu l-ħsara, huma qed jagħmlu hekk għaliex għataw qalbhom l-istituzzjoni li huma jaħdmu fiha ħadd iffunzjona għal ġid komuni. U tara differenza bejn li inti tosserva l-liġi jew li tinforza l-liġi u li inti isservi l-ġustizzja. Xi kultant biex isservi l-ġustizzja tittikser il-liġi. U bejn il-ġustizzja u l-liġi aħna għandna nażlu il-ġustizzja. L-aħħar punt li xtaqt nagħmel huwa kemm importanti li t-tema ta' integrità nagħmluha waħda popolari. Irridu nikkonvinċu lin-nies illi l-ħajja ta' integrità l-unika ħajja ta' dinjità illi hu possibbli wieħed ikollu. Grazzi ħafna.
Grazzi Robert. Issa x'sa nagħmlu? Prof. Swarrington.
I'm going to speak in English to give a break to Vicky Ann and in the hope as well that Dr. Delisi will understand what I have to say. George asked me to summarize the proceedings. Well, it will be difficult to summarize the proceedings, and what I propose to do instead is to give you a brief synthesis, a reflection back, perhaps a little coherently, of what has been said, but as well what has not been said or what has not been emphasized here. And I want to begin by reminding you of two comments made by Dr. Delisi at the beginning of his talk, when first he spoke about thanking Repubblica for the invitation and expressed what his understanding of thanks is. Not a courtesy, he said, but a sign of covenantal friendship. Un patto di amicizia was what he said. Covenantal friendship. There is a parallel here insofar as the meaning of integrity is concerned. In the course of the morning, you made it clear that integrity is not simple compliance with rules, but it's an expression of a covenantal bond which distinguishes or marks or characterizes the general attitudes towards power, towards public office and office holding, an understanding of the meaning of political action and the ends of political action, and a covenantal understanding of economic and social relations, particularly, I think, at a time when our society is now highly plural and we are going through profound transitions, technological, economic, cultural, social, and to a degree political as well. His second was a comment, or a mention rather, of Joseph Conrad, my favorite novelist. In my view, the great novelist of integrity and justice in the lives of individuals and of communities and states. Conrad presents integrity and justice as having literary qualities, as qualities or elements of statecraft on one hand, that's the political side, and citizenship, and that is where the individual and the community come in. So when we speak about the future of relationship of justice and integrity, we need to think in terms of both arts and sciences, not simply the science of law, but statecraft, in the way it was understood in the 19th century, for example. So that's by way of an introduction. I'm now going to try to summarize my comments under two headings. One is the diagnosis of our current condition, and the other is about prognosis and prescription. I think the emphasis here was on diagnosis, trying to understand the causes of our present condition. And here we are dealing with what in public policy we would call a wicked problem. We have a complex bundle of phenomena, of historical experiences, of institutional design, of a political economy, an economic and political system intertwined, which has been created by historical circumstances, by Malta's small size, and by the economic transition from a fortress to an entrepot. The consequence of this is that when we come to discuss what is to be done to restore integrity to public life, we are navigating a situation marked by factual uncertainty, or fluidity perhaps, moral ambiguity, and complex chains of cause and effect. What has emerged clearly from the interaction this morning is that while we can distinguish personal integrity and institutional integrity, if we are to achieve integrity in public life, the intertwining of these two must be acknowledged and affirmed. There was a great deal of talk about values, and to be frank, this just gives me the shivers, because values are things that are desirable in themselves, not necessarily good in themselves. Money is a value, but it's not necessarily good in itself. In fact, they say money is the root of all evil. And values exist outside of us. So, as with anything outside of us, we can bow down to them and acknowledge them, and then quietly go about our business in contradiction to those values. But we said nothing about virtue or the virtues. So while our educational system, and perhaps our families as well, and our professions, which we didn't mention at all, try to form us in values or try to communicate values, they do very little, I think, to form us in the virtues or to cultivate within us the virtues. And virtues are personal qualities. You can never betray a virtue. There might be an occasional lapse or a weakening, but if a person is prudent, a person is generally prudent. If a person is courageous, that person is generally courageous, not sometimes. The last point on which there was a general convergence was the ambivalence of our family, our educational system, our state, and I would add our professions, in forming the Maltese people for integrity, forming them in the virtues. And this is something where academics can make, I think, a contribution. Vicky Ann began speaking about intellectuals as those who deal with the realm of ideas, who can stimulate discourses, who can investigate and enlarge our understanding of cause and effect, the value of systems and the weaknesses of institutions. But we said nothing about the professions. I think of the professions as the first line of defense for integrity in public life. I would add, and this is a very gross and simplistic, perhaps, statement that I'm going to make, that we need to look hard at 3 guilty professions in Malta, at the risk of offending all the lawyers here. The legal profession, secondly, the accounting profession, which is the mainstay of our current economic model, and thirdly, the architecture and civil engineering profession, which has contributed so much to the environmental degradation of the country. 3 guilty professions, not just guilty men and maybe women as well. 3 other points that emerged in our diagnosis was, first of all, the importance that there should not be complacency, that every victory won is not the end, but merely one step further in the struggle to secure integrity and justice. Secondly, we spoke about the importance of narrative and discourse in shaping public attitudes, public perceptions of our situation. Thirdly, and this was hardly underlined, just mentioned in passing or implicit, we need to recognize as well, if we are to redesign our society and our institutions to secure integrity and justice, we need to recognize that there are new powers in the land, active in the land, which require new approaches to securing integrity and justice. Until the recent past, the great powers in the land were the colonial power, the state institutions, and the Catholic Church. Today, the killing of Mrs. Caruana Galizia shows 2 great powers. First, the greater, in my view, which is the press, a free press, which Mrs. Caruana Galizia epitomized. And excuse me for saying Mrs. Caruana Galizia, for me this is a title of respect, whereas if we speak of Daphne, I have a sense that we trivialize her. Secondly, organized crime and the nexus between organized crime, our economic system, and our politics. Let's move on to the prognosis and the prescription. Many of you spoke about the importance of institutional design. Our institutions look good on paper, but, and here I'm talking out of the authority of my own personal field, 40 years working on institutional design, our institutions are paper tigers. They are designed purposely to have loopholes, weaknesses, and flaws. Every single one of them. We have numerous integrity institutions in submissions to the OECD mission, which looked at the Commissioner for Standards in Public Life. I mentioned 7, excluding the police and the judiciary. But what we do not have is an integrity ecosystem. In other words, these 7 institutions, the Ombudsman, the Permanent Commission Against Corruption, the FIAU, the National Audit Office, and others, the Commissioner for Standards in Public Life especially, are individually excellent, but they do not cohere. There is nothing to concert their activities. The second point concerns the vital importance of formation for virtuous citizenship. This is something which is becoming a matter of core interest in contemporary political thought, but it's hardly mentioned in Malta. What do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, forming people around not the idea of social contract, which is easily made and broken, but around the idea of covenantal relationships. And covenants, as the Old Testament tells us, are enduring pacts of friendship despite inequalities in a society. Secondly, out of this covenantal understanding of relationships, the cultivation of critical attitudes towards power and authority. And when I say critical, I exclude subversive attitudes towards power and authority. The Maltese subvert authority. Thirdly, the formation of a moral conscience. The family, our schools, our state, and our professions don't work effectively in this regard. Civil society is making great inroads. And here, hats off to Repubblica, first and foremost, to Occupy Justice equally, and the third, which is not represented here, but which I admire greatly, Graffiti. But there are others as well. What I would like to see there is, again, a concertation of these forces without in any way reducing their autonomy. The third point, much greater thought about the role of public intellectuals in public life. Vicky Ann made a passionate appeal to the university community, not the institution, but the community. Up until the 60s and 70s, universities functioned as the moral conscience and the moral compass of societies undergoing great traumas. Today, they have been totally appropriated by the political economy of contemporary capitalism, late capitalism. We need to think hard about the role of professions as well, and that was not mentioned here, and I would suggest it be part of the agenda of Repubblica. Finally, we need to think about creating what I call, what many scholars are now calling, a deliberative democracy. Not one where there is discussion or negotiation, but something much deeper. A democracy which transcends ideologies and partisan interests, and which empowers people to engage critically with public affairs. It's a tall order. It's a hope which may never be realized, not in my lifetime for sure, but it is nonetheless something that needs to be cultivated. How can we move in this direction towards a deliberative democracy? And here I single out 2 ideas that were shared. The first is the importance of memory and memorialization. Our state and political parties have for the last 60 years, assumed a monopoly on public memory and memorialization. You have only to look at the awful public memorials all over Valletta and Floriana and our towns and villages to know what that means. Thanks to Occupy Justice and Republica, a new initiative in memorialization is coming to the fore. It will take time to bear fruit, but it is very good that it has started. The last point, the last avenue, as I would see it, towards creating a deliberative democracy is to begin slowly working to change the balance of risk and reward, incentives and sanctions, insofar as engagement in public life is concerned. This is a question of education, it's a question of institutional design, it's a question of a change of heart, I would say a conversion of heart. That brings my summing up to a close. I hope I have not offended anybody, least of all the legal profession, because I may one day need your services. I had no intention of doing that. I would say events like this instill hope in a country which is fast surrendering to fatalism. And one of the great roles of civil society today is to keep alive not merely the flame of struggle, but above all, the unquenchable light of hope. Thank you.
Grazzi ħafna, Professor Warrington, ma ħanżid xejn għax nibża li nħassar l-aħħar messaġġ. Grazzi intom tal-li sibtu l-ħin għattajtu nofstan hawnhekk. Nispera nieħdu ftit ħsibijiet magħna. Grazzi l-Professur Cremona li xkella biċċa xogħol mhux ħażin. Naħseb speċjalment anki meta bdiet titraduċi ċertu djomi. Grazzi lilha wkoll. Grazzi lil kulħadd, il-kumplament tal-ġurnata tajba. Grazzi.